Little girl begs billionaire CEO, "I don't have money, but let me fix your engine." Steam hissed from beneath the hood of the black Mercedes-AMG, rising in pale ribbons that curled into a low October sky the color of wet concrete. Highway 77's rest stop outside Clearwater, Ohio, looked like a place time forgot. Cracked asphalt spidering toward the cornfields, faded lane paint, picnic tables with initials carved by bored truckers and high school couples. The scent of hot coolant, sweet and metallic, drifted on the wind. Vivian Thornfield, 45, razor-sharp, immaculately tailored, stood with her phone pinned between shoulder and cheek, the screen flecked with fine mist. "This is Vivian Thornfield. I need a tow at mile marker 184. She said, each syllable clipped with the confidence of someone used to compliance. Static. A bored dispatcher. "Ma'am, weather's rolling in. You're 3 deep. 2, maybe 3 hours. The line clicked dead. For a suspended heartbeat, all Vivian heard was the tick-tick-tick of heat bleeding off aluminum, and the distant bass note of semis punching through headwinds. She adjusted the lapel of her charcoal suit and stared into her own reflection in the car's lacquer. A woman who built an automotive empire on certainty now stranded by something as primitive as boiling water. Movement. From behind a rust-choked pickup stepped a girl, small, wiry, with oil-stained fingers and sneakers gone gray at the toes. Torn jeans. A Cleveland Browns sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. Her dark hair was pulled back with an elastic that looked like it once bundled newspapers. She approached on quiet feet, gaze never leaving the Mercedes. Eyes narrowed the way mechanics narrow their eyes when they're listening for a misfire you can't hear unless you've tried to nurse a dying engine past payday. "Your radiator's overheated," the girl said, stopping at a polite distance. "Thermostat housing's probably cracked. If you're unlucky, you blew a gasket." Vivian blinked. "Excuse me?" The girl pointed to a bright green bloom spreading under the front bumper. "Coolant. You can smell it. And I heard the knock when you pulled off the ramp. Not good to keep driving." Vivian's instinct was to smile and wave the problem toward professionals. This was an 8-year-old in thrift store clothes diagnosing a German performance car. But the earnest gravity in the child's voice, the way her eyes mapped the engine bay through the closed hood, checked Vivian's impulse to dismiss. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Vivian asked. "Teacher work day," the girl said. A flicker of practiced caution crossed her face and vanished. "I was just walking. You know about cars?" "A little," she said, like saying the Pacific is a little wet. "My friend Victor taught me. He worked on engines 30 years. Says machines talk if you listen, right?" "Victor who?" "Victor Campbell. He's under the Mill Street Bridge now." She said it flatly, without shame, just a fact about geography and survival. Vivian hesitated. Mill Street Bridge. Council meetings called it an encampment, like the word could sand down the edges of cold nights on concrete. She knew the location. She did not know anyone there. "What's your name?" "Jenna. Jenna Caldwell." The surname landed with a thud in Vivian's chest. Caldwell. She saw emails and depositions like flashcards, OSHA memos, legal bills, the containment strategy. Her HR team had executed with florist's precision. Lance Caldwell had hammered on about safety stops and sensor bypasses. He became the sticking valve in a machine designed to run smooth. And the machine did what machines do to foreign objects. Now his daughter stood in front of Vivian's smoking hood, hands inked with grease, offering help. "I don't have money," Jenna said, chin lifting a fraction. "Can I fix your engine?" The question hung between them, impossible and simple. Vivian's boardroom brain ticked through liability, child, tools, hot coolant, while something quieter in her cut through the noise. The girl's knuckles were nicked. The cuffs of her sweatshirt darkened by years of wiping hands on fabric when there was no rag. She had the coiled look of kids who learn early that adults say no unless you present a solution. "Just a look," Vivian said, surprised by her own voice. "No touching until you explain." Jenna's face opened like sunrise. She moved around the grill with reverence, found the hood release without groping, and lifted, stepping back from the first scald of steam like she'd been burned before. AMG V8, she breathed. Dry sump. Aluminum block. Nice. She traced the air above components, pointing, naming, translating a foreign alphabet. Coolant reservoirs dry. Look, white residue where it vented. Thermostat housings here. She leaned, eyes narrowing. Crack. Hairline, along the seam. Vivian saw it because Jenna made her see it, a thin, mean fracture glinting like a spider thread. Can it be fixed? Not here. You need a new housing, torque it to spec, flush the system. But I can get you 10 miles easy. Maybe 15. How? Jenna shifted from foot to foot, gauging how weird the next part would sound to someone in heels. Egg whites and pepper. Vivian raised an eyebrow. The proteins cook when they hit hot aluminum. They seal hairline cracks for a little while. Pepper granules help plug micro leaks. Old trucker trick. We also need the right coolant, European, not universal green, and water. There's a highway mart over there. Against a lifetime of protocols, Vivian found herself nodding. Let's go. Inside the fluorescent glare, Vivian felt conspicuous. Armani under a buzzing ballast, quarterly reports shrunk to a plastic aisle tag. Jenna moved with purpose, scanning shelves like a pro. Not that one, she murmured, steering Vivian away from a jug with the wrong chemistry. This OET-based. Compatible. At the counter, the clerk's eyes took in Vivian's suit, then Jenna's shoes, then toggled between them like a coin toss he'd lost too many times. 1875, he said, tone preloaded with suspicion. Vivian slid a platinum card across chipped laminate. Jenna stiffened, shoulders contracting under an invisible weight that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how rooms change when people decide who you are in a single glance. Outside, wind pushed leaves low across the lot. The sky had sagged into a darker gray, edges of rain sharpening. Back at the Mercedes, Jenna laid out supplies on the bumper: eggs, pepper packets, coolant, a bottle of water from a vending machine. She cracked eggs into a paper cup with the unshowy competence of someone who's been taught by necessity. Yolks in one cup, whites in another. My dad used to make omelets on Sundays, she said, whisking with a plastic fork until the whites went silvery. The words came soft, like the steam, story and smell blending under the open hood. Before things got complicated. Vivian wanted to ask what complicated meant and already knew. Instead, she slid into the driver's seat at Jenna's request. Ignition on. Keep it around 1500 RPM, Jenna called. We want flow, not a boil. The engine barked, settled into a rough idle. Vivian watched the attached needle climb. She had owned performance cars for 20 years and never once watched their hearts beat this closely. Jenna held the radiator cap with a rag, cracked it carefully so pressure bled with an angry hiss, then poured a thin ribbon of whites into the throat of the system. The smell changed, hot metal and breakfast, a combination so wrong it looped back to right. Pepper followed, a quick shake. She capped, waited, listened with her whole body. The hiss softened. The knock smoothed. Okay, she said, more to the car than to Vivian. Circulate. Set. Then we top with coolant, burp the air. Vivian's hands held the throttle steady. Outside the windshield, Jenna's small figure shifted, checking clamps, eyes moving in deliberate patterns. It struck Vivian with almost physical force. The girl didn't copy motions, she understood sequences. Where did you learn this? Vivian asked over the engine's hum. Victor says engines are honest, Jenna said, eyes still scanning. If they're sick, they tell you. If you're careful, they forgive you for not being rich. The RPM needle steadied. Steam thinned. Jenna nodded to herself, then twisted the cap, added green gold coolant slow and steady, tapped a hose to coax bubbles out like a nurse burping a baby. Temperature gauge? She asked. Dropping, Vivian said, surprised at how proud she sounded of a machine doing what it should. Jenna wiped her hands on a rag that had clearly been other things before it was a rag. You're good to go 10 miles, maybe more, if you don't push her. Harold Peterson's shop is closest. Industrial Avenue. He won't upsell you. He doesn't do that. You know him? Jenna's chin dipped, a yes that carried history. He's fair. The first drops came fat and cold, polka-dotting blacktop. Trucks downshifted as the wind shouldered into their trailers. Vivian looked at the passenger door, then at Jenna's soaked sweatshirt. The boundaries in her life, between executive and everyone else, had always been bright paint lines. Today they blurred like water over chalk. Get in, she said, door swinging wide. I'll take you to Peterson's. You don't have to, Jenna said automatically, reflex born of years of not wanting to owe anyone. I know, Vivian said. I want to understand what you did. And I'd like to thank the man who taught you. Jenna slid into leather like it might not be allowed to touch her. Her small hands smoothed the seatbelt flat, muscle memory of care over things that weren't hers. Vivian eased the Mercedes onto the exit lane, keeping the touch shy of 2,000, eyes flicking between the road and a temperature gauge that now held steady just left of center. As they merged, rain deepened, a steady drum on glass. Jenna talked about airflow and thermostats, and why some engines run hot when you think they shouldn't. Vivian listened. Really listened. To a child who had solved the problem with eggs and pepper, to the car's relieved hum, to the ugly creak of something she'd kept bolted shut inside herself beginning to move. The rest stopped, shrank in the mirror. Picnic tables, cracked paint, a dispatcher's indifference, receding into rain. Ahead, Industrial Avenue and a faded blue sign waited like a next chapter either of them had planned to write. Peterson's Auto Repair didn't look like the sort of place that welcomed a black Mercedes AMG. The weathered brick building on Industrial Avenue wore 30 winters on its face. The faded blue roll-up doors rattled in the wind. A hand-painted sign over the office read, Harold Peterson, honest work, fair prices. Gravel popped under the tires as Vivian eased the car into a spot, keeping the revs low just like Jenna had instructed. The temperature needle stayed steady, left of center, obedient. A heavy-set man in gray coveralls stepped out from the nearest bay, wiping his hands on a threadbare rag. His hair was close-cropped, his shoulders thick from a lifetime leaning over engines. His eyes warmed the instant they landed on Jenna. Well, I'll be, he called. If it isn't Miss Caldwell. What are you doing riding shotgun in a Benz on a school day? Hi, Mr. Peterson, Jenna chirped, already half out of the seat. We used the egg white trick to seal a crack in the thermostat housing. We need a new part and a full flush. The man's eyebrows climbed. Slowly, his gaze slid to Vivian. The warmth drained a few degrees as he took in the suit, the watch, the polished car. Peterson, he said flatly, sticking out a hand. Harold. Vivian Thornfield, she replied. The name opened a new kind of distance between them. Not shock, recognition. Assessment. Thornfield, he repeated. As in Thornfield Automotive. As in, she said evenly. Harold's jaw set like a torque wrench on the final click. He looked past Vivian at Jenna. Let me guess, you diagnosed it on sound. And the puddle, Jenna said, pointing. Coolant's the wrong color for universal green. Victor's been teaching you the old tricks, Harold said, a reluctant half-smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. He tipped his chin toward the dim shop interior. He's around back, sorting inventory. Go say hi. I'll talk with... He paused, his tone cooling again. Ms. Thornfield. Inside the bay, the air was warm with the smell of oil and hot steel. Vivian followed Harold into a small office that looked like it had been assembled out of decades. Metal desk with a burned-in coffee ring, corkboard modeled with business cards, a calendar featuring a '69 Camaro that had faded to sepia. Outside the window, she could see Jenna belining toward a tall, lean man with a tidy gray beard. He moved with economical grace, placing sockets into a drawer one by one. When he turned at Jenna's call, the gentleness in his face made him look younger by 10 years. Coffee? Harold asked, pouring without waiting for an answer. He handed her a mug the color of axle grease and sat, his gaze steady. So, what exactly brings Thornfield CO to my bays? A broken thermostat housing, Vivian said. He let the silence stretch long enough to prove the point wasn't accepted. Lance Caldwell used to bring his truck to me, Harold said finally. Every 3,000 miles, like clockwork. Changed his own air filter until his hands went numb that winter after the line shut down. Honest man. Good father. Vivian set the mug down. Mr. Peterson. You know what I heard last year? Harold said, voice quiet. That after he told management the safety guards were being bypassed so your numbers would look pretty, he stopped getting calls back from every shop within 100 miles. Can't prove who made that happen. But we all know how the game's played. Through the glass, Jenna leaned into a dogged manual, while Victor pointed out torque specs with a patient finger. Vivian's reflection hovered over the scene like a ghost. I'm not going to argue with you, she said. You'd win. Harold blinked at that, surprised. My car needs the housing replaced and the system flushed. She continued, business tone slipping back over a conscience that had been rubbed raw all afternoon. Do it properly. And put any overdue work for Mr. Caldwell's truck on my bill. Harold's eyes hardened. He doesn't want charity. It's not charity, Vivian said. It's payment for consultation. His daughter diagnosed an AMG in a parking lot with higher accuracy than most boutique service departments I've used in Boston, and LA pay her rate, and credit it to his account. Harold stared another beat, then tipped his head. That dog'll hunt. He began writing on a carbon pad, the swift slanting hand of a man who's filled out 1,000 estimates. Housing will be here in the morning. I'll get you roadworthy now, then do it right when the part lands. Thank you, Vivian said. They watched in silence while Jenna and Victor worked through a question only the two of them seemed to understand, some choreography of airflow and thermostat hysteresis. Victor guided her hands to a torque wrench, having her feel the click at 20 inch-pounds, then again at 40. Jenna's face was rapt. It didn't look like a homeless man and an 8-year-old in a garage. It looked like a master passing down a language. 30 years at Morrison's, Harold said, following her gaze. When they shuttered, he lost the job, the insurance, the house. Never lost the craft. He blew on his coffee. He's been coming here at 6 a.m., helping me get straight. Won't take a dollar he hasn't earned. Vivian swallowed against the knot in her throat. In the office window, she could see herself reflected between Jenna and Victor, a neat dividing line. I'd like to thank him, she said. You can't, Harold replied. But don't offer him pity. He'll hand it back. An hour later, the Mercedes idled smooth and cool. Harold's crew had pressure-tested the repair, topped and bled the system, and set a service slot for morning when the new housing arrived. Vivian signed the estimate and slid her card across. Add a line item, she said. Consultation, Caldwell J. And apply the balance to Lance's truck. Harold took the card, paused, then gave a single, firm nod. Fair deal. Can I get a ride? Jenna asked, hovering by the office door with a hopeful look she tried to disguise as casual. Of course, Vivian said. Where to? Oakwood Apartments, Jenna said, then added quickly. It's not far. Industrial Avenue gave way to Riverside Drive, the river swollen brown under the sagging sky. The Oakwood complex rose ahead, a long, low slab with the tired slouch of buildings designed for short-term solutions that became permanent. Vivian parked. Rainwater poured from a clogged gutter like a badly aimed faucet. Jenna pointed at a second-floor unit with a yellow door that glowed bizarrely cheerful against the gray. Dad painted it, she said. Mom said yellow was the happiest color. The stairwell smelled faintly of bleach and boiled pasta. Inside the apartment, after a beat of hesitation that read as 1,000 calculations, Lance Caldwell stepped forward. Mid-40s, lean in the way of men who stretch meals without complaint, dark hair threaded with premature gray, eyes the same warm brown as his daughter's, wary and alive. There's my girl, he said, kneeling to take Jenna into a hug that absorbed the rain and the day and the world. When he looked up again, recognition flashed. He didn't flinch. He didn't scowl. He simply locked it down, like a man who's learned where the live wires are. "Miss Thornfield." "Mr. Caldwell," Vivian said. "Your daughter saved me a very expensive tow and 3 hours of my life." "Did she now?" His voice held equal parts pride and caution. The apartment was clean and careful. Second-hand furniture arranged to steal back square footage, books stacked into makeshift shelves, a wall crowded with a child's drawings, rockets, engines, a bridge, a yellow door. Lance brewed coffee in a dented steel pot with the reverence of ceremony. "Jenna's been helping Harold," he said, handing over a mug. "Organizing hardware, sweeping. She comes home smelling like 10W30 and joy. She comes home brilliant," Vivian said. "Victor says she has hands and a heart for machines." At the name, something gentler moved through Lance's expression. "He's good to her." "Good man." They sat. Rain tapped at the window unit. Jenna chattered about torque specs and gasket materials and how German engineers think about heat differently, until Lance sent her down the hall with a smile and a not-quite order to wash up. When she was gone, the air changed. "Why are you here?" Lance asked quietly. No anger. Just a question stripped to bone. "And please don't say it's because my kid impressed you." Vivian looked down at her coffee and saw a boardroom table, a courtroom, a hospital bed, a bridge. "Because I'm starting to believe we handled your warnings like a cost center instead of a call to do the right thing," she said. "And because today your daughter made me listen." Lance let out a small breath that could have been a laugh if it didn't hurt. "Brian Torres lost his leg," he said, not accusing, just stating the weight. "Because a safety guard got temporarily removed and never replaced. 8 months he fought your insurer. 8 months my name went from employee to problem." He lifted his eyes. "I'd do it again." "I know," Vivian said, and surprised herself by meaning it. "I read every memo. I approved every transition protocol. It all looked tidy on paper." She swallowed. "It didn't look like your daughter." Silence, full and human. On the wall, a crayon rocket reached past a lopsided moon. The yellow door in the drawing was bright. Jenna patted back in sock feet and curled next to her father. "Dad, I showed Miss Thornfield how to burp the air out," she said, pleased with herself. "Harold's doing the real fix in the morning." "That right?" Lance brushed a damp curl from her forehead. "Sounds like you had a good day off school." Jenna's eyes bounced between them. "Dad, Miss Thornfield owns the car company. Maybe she knows a place that's hiring." Heat rose in Vivian's face. Lance's jaw twitched. He squeezed Jenna's hand. "Sweetheart, Miss Thornfield has a lot on her plate," he said gently. "We'll be all right." Vivian stared at the steam rising from her cup and found the lines she had never crossed sitting there, thin as a hairline crack. "Jenna," she said, choosing each word with care, "I can't make promises in your living room. But I can promise to look at what my company does to people who tell us the truth." Jenna nodded, not fully understanding, already reaching for the next problem to solve. She hopped down and disappeared into the little bedroom to find the drawing with the rocket she wanted to show. At the door, as Vivian left, Jenna barreled back and wrapped her in a fierce, spontaneous hug. It shocked them both. "Will I see you tomorrow at Harold's?" she asked into Vivian's coat. "Yes," Vivian said before she could think better of it. Morning. Outside, the rain felt colder. Vivian walked to the Mercedes and sat a long moment with her hands on the wheel, the wipers counting seconds. In the rearview mirror, the yellow door glowed like a small, stubborn sun in a building the world had forgotten. She thought about a leg crushed beneath a machine, an engineer under a bridge teaching a child to listen, a list somewhere in HR labeled transition risks that might as well be labeled fathers. When she finally pulled away, she did not point the car toward her penthouse. She pointed it at a downtown tower where the lights on the 37th floor burned late, and where, tomorrow, there would be a meeting that didn't go the way meetings usually did. The 37th floor of Thornfield Automotive's headquarters was built to project power. Wide glass walls framed the city like a blueprint stretched across steel and river. The mahogany desk, imported from Florence, gleamed under track lighting, Even the carpet had been custom dyed to match the company's branding colors. Normally, Vivian found comfort in this environment, in the precision of it. Today, it felt like a cage. Sarah Mitchell, her sharp-eyed assistant, entered briskly, arms loaded with quarterly reports. "Production's up 12%, Sarah said, spreading charts across the desk. "Margins have improved since we cut back on the supplier safety inspections. Robert Ashford wants to fast-track the Patterson Industries acquisition. He's calling a board meeting for next week." Vivian nodded distractedly, but her mind was still under the low beams of Oakwood Apartments. The yellow door, Jenna's careful voice explaining airflow, Lance's steady eyes daring her to admit the truth. Sarah's words about cutting back safety inspections landed differently now, echoing against Lance Caldwell's ruined career and Brian Torres's lost leg. "Schedule the board meeting," Vivian said at last. "But I want every personnel file from Patterson on my desk before then." "All 300? Sarah asked, startled. "Yes. All 300. Sarah hesitated, but didn't argue. She gathered her papers and slipped out, leaving Vivian alone with the weight of choices that once seemed routine. She turned her chair toward the city. Somewhere below, Jenna was probably sitting in a classroom with her hair pulled back by that makeshift rubber band, sketching engines in the margins of her notebook. Somewhere below, Lance was filling out another job application he knew would be ignored. The desk phone buzzed. Theodore Grant, her longtime driver, spoke in his gravelly voice. "Mrs. Thornfield, there's a social worker in the lobby. Says it's about a child named Jenna Caldwell." Vivian's pulse stumbled. "Send her up." Minutes later, Vanessa Pierce entered the office. She carried herself with the no-nonsense bearing of someone who had walked into too many homes with eviction notices and too many classrooms with questions she couldn't answer. She sat without waiting to be asked. "Mrs. Thornfield," she began, opening a folder thick with forms. "You had contact with Jenna Caldwell yesterday?" "Yes," Vivian replied cautiously. "She helped me with a vehicle issue. Harold Peterson phoned us this morning," Vanessa said. "He was concerned. Given the Caldwell family's history with your company, any involvement from you raises complications." "Complications?" Vivian repeated, sharper than she intended. "Mr. Caldwell has been unemployed for 18 months. Their apartment complex has code violations. There are concerns about Jenna's nutrition, her supervision, particularly her unsupervised association with a homeless man under Mill Street Bridge. Victor Campbell." Vanessa's tone was clinical, each syllable flattened by bureaucratic repetition. "If conditions don't improve within 60 days, we may need to consider alternative placement." Alternative placement. The euphemism hit Vivian harder than any lawsuit had. She saw Jenna's small hands steady on a torque wrench, her quiet pride, her hug by the yellow door. She imagined those hands folded in a foster home far from her father, her voice silenced by strangers who wouldn't understand her gift. "What would it take to avoid that outcome?" Vivian asked carefully. "Stable employment for Mr. Caldwell," Vanessa said, closing the folder. "Financial stability would resolve most of our concerns. But it must be genuine. Not temporary assistance. Certainly not charity." After she left, Vivian sat in the quiet of her glass office, the city's lights blurred by a sudden rain. For the first time in years, spreadsheets and acquisitions felt irrelevant. She thought of Robert Ashford's transition protocols, the clean corporate language for blacklists and silenced voices. She thought of Jenna's question, asked with the clear eyes of a child, "Do you think heart matters more than money?" When Robert Ashford arrived that afternoon, silver hair immaculate, cufflinks catching the light, Vivian already knew the conversation would change everything. "Patterson Industries has labor troublemakers," Robert said without preamble. He slid a manila folder across her desk. "I've marked the employees who should be eliminated during the transition. We'll avoid another Caldwell situation." Vivian stared at the folder, at the names reduced to risks. Somewhere in another folder sat Lance Caldwell's name, crossed out of every opportunity. Somewhere, an 8-year-old girl was paying the price. "Robert," Vivian said slowly, her voice steadier than she felt. What happened with Lance Caldwell at Clearwater? Was that necessary? Robert's eyes flicked up, irritated. Ancient history. He was a disruptive element who cost us millions. Industry-wide restrictions were essential to protect us from similar damage. And his daughter? Vivian asked. Is her future collateral damage too? For the first time, Robert looked unsettled. I wasn't aware he had children. Irrelevant, in any case. Business cannot run on sentiment. Vivian leaned back in her chair, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. For the first time in her career, she said words that would change her life as surely as Jenna's had changed her car's course at that rest stop. Then maybe business should. The Mill Street Bridge stretched across the Clearwater River like a scar of poured concrete. Beneath its underbelly, where rust dripped down like tears and the shadows never quite lifted, an entire encampment had formed, cardboard shelters patched with tarps, smoke curling from fires and cut-down oil drums, laundry strung on ropes like faded prayer flags. Vivian had never set foot in such a place before. Her heels sank into mud and broken glass as she walked carefully through the makeshift lanes, guided by the echo of rainwater dripping from steel beams. People glanced up as she passed, suspicion, curiosity, resignation. These weren't the caricatures she had filed away in her mind during council meetings. These were men and women arranging their lives with scraps, keeping dignity alive in the margins. A woman tended a pot of soup over an open flame. A young man with a weathered army jacket swept water from his doorway with a broken broom. Every face carried history. She found Victor Campbell near the back, under a patchwork tarp. He was hunched over a crate of salvaged tools, sorting sockets with the reverence of a priest arranging relics. His beard was neatly trimmed despite the circumstances, and his eyes, though tired, were alert. Mr. Campbell? Vivian said softly. He turned. Recognition flickered, not of her face, but of her suit, her posture, the world she came from. Ma'am, he said, voice low but steady. Can I help you? I think you already have, she replied. Your student, Jenna Caldwell, saved me on Highway 77 yesterday. At the name, Victor's lined face lit with pride. Brightest kid I ever met. She listens to engines the way musicians listen to chords. Sees things most folks overlook. He studied Vivian more closely. You're not just here to thank me. Vivian exhaled, the truth pressing hard against her ribs. I wanted to see for myself what she was learning. And I wanted to see what we've ignored. Victor set the sockets aside, folding his hands on his knees. Ignored is polite. Truth is, folks like me are easier forgotten. We get left here under the bridge so the city can keep shining topside. But that girl, she doesn't forget anyone. Not me, not her father. She believes broken things can be fixed if you care enough to try. Vivian felt the words pierce deeper than any boardroom rebuke. What if her father never gets the chance? What if the system stays rigged against him? Victor's gaze didn't waver. Then you fix the system. Or at least you stop breaking the ones who try to do right. The sound of traffic thundered overhead, a reminder of the two worlds divided by concrete. Vivian looked around at the encampment, the small signs of order among chaos, and realized she was standing inside the human cost of every cost-cutting measure she had once applauded. Later that night, back in her penthouse with its glass walls and silent appliances, Vivian couldn't escape the images. Jenna's small hands steady on a torque wrench, the yellow door painted against decay, Lance's guarded courtesy, Victor's quiet dignity beneath the bridge. For the first time in years, quarterly margins meant nothing. For the first time, she saw her empire not as achievement, but as weight. The following morning, she returned to Peterson's garage. The Mercedes sat in the bay, thermostat housing replaced, coolant flushed, running smooth. Jenna was already there, hair tied back, perched on a stool with Victor leaning over a diagram. She looked up at Vivian, eyes bright with the kind of hope adults have long since buried. You came back, Jenna said. I said I would, Vivian replied. Harold handed her the keys, his expression unreadable. Car's good as new. Invoices settled. Vivian looked past him, straight at Lance Caldwell's daughter. "Jenna, you have a gift. A rare one. And gifts like yours deserve every chance to grow." Jenna grinned, the grease on her cheeks failing to dull the radiance. "Victor says engines tell the truth if you listen." Vivian nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time I started listening too." That afternoon, at the Thornfield Automotive boardroom, Vivian stood before a table of men in tailored suits. Robert Ashford was there, expectant, already bristling with resistance. "Gentlemen," she began, "our transition protocols stop today. We will no longer blacklist whistleblowers. We will invest in safety, not bury it." Ashford scoffed. "That's sentiment talking. Sentiment doesn't pay dividends." Vivian looked at him, her voice steady, her decision already carved in stone. "Neither does destroying the people who build our cars. Heart matters more than money. I learned that from an 8-year-old mechanic on Highway 77. The room erupted in murmurs. Some angry, some surprised. But Vivian didn't waver. She knew the battle ahead would be brutal. She also knew she had crossed the line between who she was and who she would become. Outside, the October rain cleared for the first time in days. And somewhere across Clearwater, a girl with oil-stained fingers sat at a yellow door sketching rocket engines, believing, for the first time, that the world might finally be listening. The boardroom battle did not end in a single meeting. Thornfield Automotive's directors, most of them veterans of a world where balance sheets outweighed human cost, pushed back with sharp words and colder looks. Robert Ashford in particular was relentless. "Vivian," he said across the polished oak table, "this company has thrived because we have been ruthless where others hesitated. You're proposing sentimentality as policy. That is weakness. Shareholders don't reward weakness." Vivian met his gaze without flinching. "They will reward integrity. And if they don't, then I will remind them that scandals cost more than decency ever will. The Torres accident already cost us millions. What happens when the next one hits, and this time, the whistleblower's story goes public before we bury it?" A silence followed, heavy as an anvil. Some of the directors shifted uncomfortably. They remembered the headlines, the news crews outside the factory gates. Ashford's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing further. The seeds of change had been planted, though Vivian knew they would need careful tending. That night, Vivian sat alone in her penthouse, the city skyline spread beneath her like circuitry, streets glowing like veins of electricity, each light a life. For years she had admired this view as proof of her empire. Now it felt more like a reminder of how many people her decisions touched. She thought of Jenna bent over an engine diagram at Peterson's, Victor patiently guiding her hand, Lance brewing coffee in that tiny apartment with furniture held together by faith. She thought of the yellow door, painted with hope against decay. Her phone buzzed. A message from Harold Peterson, trucks in the bay. "Lance doesn't know you paid for the work. He asked me if there were any odd jobs for Jenna again. Just thought you should know." Vivian stared at the message for a long time. She realized she didn't want Lance to think of her as a benefactor slipping money under the table. She wanted him to stand again, to reclaim the dignity stripped from him. Charity could never repair what her company had broken. Opportunity could. The next morning, she arranged a meeting not in her glass tower, but in a modest conference room at the Clearwater facility, the very place where Lance Caldwell's life had been upended. She invited Harold, Victor, and against his protests, Lance himself. When they arrived, Lance looked wary, jaw tight, but Jenna bounded in with bright eyes, carrying a notebook filled with sketches of engines and rocket ships. "Why are we here?" Lance asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Vivian folded her hands. "Because I want to offer you a job." Lance froze. "A job? At Thornfield?" "Yes," she said simply. "Not a token position. A real one. Safety compliance officer. We need someone who won't look away, who won't play politics. You did that once. You paid the price for it. But if we're going to change, I need someone like you inside, not shut out." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Victor glanced at Lance with quiet encouragement. Harold nodded once, his arms crossed but his expression softened. Jenna leaned forward, eyes wide, holding her breath as though the world itself balanced on her father's answer. Lance's voice, when it came, was low, measured, but full of a pride that had been buried too long. "If this is real, if this isn't just a PR stunt, then I'll do it. But I don't want handouts. I want to earn it." Vivian extended her hand across the table. "Then let's start earning it together." When Lance shook her hand, Jenna clapped her small, oil-stained fingers together and grinned so wide the room seemed to brighten. Later, as Vivian walked out into the October air with the Caldwell family at her side, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not victory, not power, but purpose. Above them, the bridge arched across the river, its shadow long in the morning light. Beneath it, life went on in the encampment, a reminder of how fragile stability could be. But in Jenna's determined stride, in Lance's lifted shoulders, and in her own decision to finally listen, Vivian sensed the first outlines of a different future, one built not only on engines and profit, but on people. And for the first time in her career, she believed that future might truly run.